Chapter 26, Judgment Day. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet, unbearable tension, like the seconds before a storm. Every seat was filled, the gallery a sea of faces eager for justice or closure, or just a good story to tell later. Cody stood at the defendant's table, his too big suit hanging off him like a hand-me-down from a kinder time. He looked out of place, like a kid at his first school play, except this stage didn't have a curtain to hide behind. In the front row, Karen sat bolt upright, her emerald green eyes glassy but determined. Beside her, PJ leaned forward, his fingers steepled, his face a mask of grit and hope. Cody's gaze flicked to them briefly, just long enough to give a faint nod, a silent thank you for showing up. He turned back to face the judge, his palms damp against the polished wood of the table. The judge, a man who looked like he'd been sculpted out of granite and had the personality to match, flipped through the papers before him with deliberate slowness. Every rustle of the pages seemed designed to stretch the moment to its breaking point. Finally, he looked up, his gaze settling on Cody like a weight. "Mr. Steele," the judge began, his voice even and cold, "you stand before this court accused of manslaughter. The jury has reached its verdict, and it is now my duty to pass sentence." Cody felt the words like a punch to the gut. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself, his knuckles turning white. Somewhere behind him, someone coughed. It sounded deafening in the stillness. The judge adjusted his glasses and peered down at Cody, his expression unreadable. "Before I deliver the sentence, do you have anything you wish to say?" Cody hesitated. His throat felt like sandpaper, but he forced himself to speak. "Your Honor." His voice was quiet at first, then steadied. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't pull that trigger with malice in my heart. It was desperation, plain and simple. But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring back the lives lost." He paused, his gaze shifting briefly to Karen. Her lips were pressed tight, her hands clasped together as if holding herself together by sheer force of will. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Cody had to look away before his own composure cracked. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued, his voice rough but steady. Just a chance to make something good out of the mess I made. A chance to prove I'm not the worst thing I've ever done." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone like a heavy stone. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys. The judge studied him for a long moment, the kind of silence that makes you wonder if your heart's still beating. Then he cleared his throat and spoke, his voice as firm as the gavel in his hand. "Mr. Steele," he began, "the law requires accountability, but it also allows for the possibility of redemption. Considering the evidence and testimony presented, this court sentences you to 10 years in the state penitentiary with the possibility of parole after 5 years, contingent on good behavior." The words hit Cody like a hammer to the chest. 10 years. 5 if he was lucky. He swayed slightly, the edges of his vision going fuzzy for a moment, but he didn't let himself fall. Not here, not now. He nodded, the motion small but deliberate, as the gavel came down with a sharp crack. The sound shattered the stillness, and the courtroom came alive again. Karen buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. PJ sat rigid, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the edge of the bench so hard his knuckles were bone white. A court officer appeared at Cody's side, his hand resting lightly on Cody's arm as he began to lead him away. Cody walked stiffly, his boots dragging slightly against the polished floor. Just before they reached the door, he stopped and turned, his eyes finding Karen and PJ in the crowd. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in place, a silent triangle of shared pain and unspoken promises. Cody's lips moved, forming words without sound. "This isn't the end." And then he was gone, the heavy door swinging shut behind him with a hollow thud. The courtroom emptied slowly, the murmurs of the crowd rising like the tide. But Karen and PJ stayed seated, unmoving.